Clap, 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 clap. Bruh. Book of the Lizard. I'm gonna stab you. Don't get stabbed. Alright, guys. Well, I forgot that might turn off the music. Yes,
So what's first since you want a longer stream today?
First, you guys get to watch me do this real quick. Alrighty then. We are going to make alright. It's time. It's released.
More Warhammer stuff?
Yeah, it's the new Warhammer thing. We're almost at the point where we'll be playing our first Warhammer game. We're like, we've already passed the YouTube requirement. We're just on the Twitch requirement now. And I think we're at like, I think our average now is 20 people. We just need to get like 2 more because I lowered it. Because I felt bad I had set it too high. But yeah. There's that. Then I'm going to show you guys, for those of you who want to send me a Christmas present or something, Roan sometimes announces here. I updated it like, I think 2 nights ago, so now everything on it is stuff I wouldn't mind getting. You can also add your own gifts. I will try to approve them before the end of tonight. If you add something today, let me know if you send something afterwards. I have to go and thank Callistra after stream today. Stretch! Consume the winner. I will. Merry Christmas Eve. I'm doing good. How are you doing? And also, if you just want to sign up to Ko-Fi, there's Ko-Fi. There's the Ko-Fi stuff. I will let you know that I have set it up to where I get 100% of Ko-Fi. Although I forgot to remove that goal. I think I've paid for everything on my teeth. I don't think I need any more help with teeth. I'm going to be adding some more stuff to this, but like if you want to get in on the stuff, you can. But that's Ko-Fi, and that was Throne. But yeah, I get 100% of anything you give me on Ko-Fi. Yeah, I got out of the 1% fee. So a lot of you guys felt bad that any of what you gave me was going to somewhere else. So I made it where it's 100% me. So any like memberships or anything, 100% is going to me. I think we're going to do one react. We reacted to what? Oh, alright. We're going to do one of our horror reacts. And it's going to be a parter for Warhammer as well. Because we have to do another one later. So we're going to do one, the first of them now. Alright. Does that sound good to everyone? Let's start our hour-long horror react. It's going to be the Tyranids. The Bug Boys.
Boka, yes.
Boka, yes? Yeah? Huh? Right. React. Here we go.
Verus glanced up at the grandfather clock that dominated the room, suddenly conscious of its steady mechanical rhythm. It was an ancient heirloom and his family's most valuable possession, though he couldn't understand why. It was hardly accurate, and had to be adjusted regularly to bear even a passing resemblance to their solar cycle. Even so, it told him it had been over 5 hours since his father had left. He had spoken to Verus before leaving, and since then he'd been mulling over his words. The Explorator survivors have confirmed that the Splinter Fleet is heading for us, so you'll see less of me over the coming weeks. Verus had read about the Tyranid. They were a hive mind composed of horrifying warrior don't know.
So what I understand about Tyranids, before we fully get into this, is they're like bug evolution. Basically, in League context, they're Kha'Zix. They live to evolve, and they evolve to live. They care not who they're killing. They just consume and take over and constantly replicate and evolve. Is there anything I'm missing from that?
Boku is the end of their evolution?
Probably. I don't know. I don't know if I evolved from a bug, though. Forgot to eat again. I will be eating with my friend in like 5 hours, I think. Just not the correct kind of food. Oh no. But yeah, oh, those are pretty good. Alright, you were so savage to chat. Does my interrupting the vid count is towards the 1 hour? Not really, no. Okay, you swear I was following? I think you were. I feel like you were, dead man. I remember you. Like, how do you get a sub if you weren't following? But, well, thank you for the refollow. But yeah, according to chat, I am not missing much. So we'll keep going.
I intend to hunt.
So this story is basically, from what I understand, this is like a soldier. I don't think this is a Marine. This isn't a space Marine. This is like one of the soldier people.
Down was a 7-year age gap between them, such that his younger brother's play often strained his patience. He was engrossed in a game of toy soldiers between the folds of the carpet, the rules of which were a mystery known only to him. Every now and then he would glance up at Verus, imploring him to join in, and he would move some figures unenthusiastically. The scaling bothered him. He had never seen an Astartes, but he was sure that the Emperor's avenging angels were relatively taller. Distracted, the clock impinged on his awareness again, and he got up to stretch his legs, walking around the grand table just to be away from his brother for a moment. He found himself in front of a bust of Lord Solar Macarius. The sculptor had done fine work. They'd probably never met him, but Verus liked to think that they had. Otherwise, he thought they wouldn't have included his imperfections. He had been just a man, like he'd be one day. He unconsciously raised himself up at the thought. A shadow fell across him and he turned, eyebrows curling in annoyance that Otto had climbed onto the table again. It wasn't Otto, however. His mind faltered, primal senses jammed by the sudden detection of lethal threat, unable to fathom the creature that stood mere meters away. It towered above him, claws outstretched, relaxed, almost beckoning, mantis-like scything talons arched above, suspended with impossible insect stillness. Every fiber of its being indicated it was bred to kill, and yet it didn't move. Adrenaline crashed through his veins and his mind recoiled at every aspect of its presence. His floundering attention was seized by its stare. Deep set between chitinous protrusions, its eyes were small and
I don't like it already.
unspeakably black. They reflected no light. Yet within them Verus perceived a dreadful intelligence without sentience. A calculation that knew neither malice nor mercy. And yet it didn't move, standing before him with monstrous composure and an executioner's intent, appraising him, its tail held high behind its head like a serpent poised to strike. Verus might have mistaken it for a statue if not for the questing tendrils that spilled from where its mouth should have been, writhing gently, as if tasting the air. The shock of seeing a filament of the great devourer appear in such a familiar space almost broke him, casting his comfortable ignorance into hideous form. The pit in his stomach opened wide beneath and threatened to swallow him. All he could hear was his heart hammering in his ears. The grandfather clock struck the hour then, the resonating metallic sound shattering his paralysis. Amid coursing adrenaline, his cognition flooded.
This story is very descriptive. I don't like it. I don't need to know that he has tentacles in his mouth. No, thank you.
Back. He was no threat.
What am I eating? I'm having the last of my jerky. Wait, how do you know I'm eating? Oh, my model.
If he was, he'd be dead already. No, the creature's intent was to instill fear, and that realization hardened his resolve. He remembered Macarius behind him, and his courage ignited. He remembered Otto, who, still absorbed in play, had yet to notice the intruder. He was further away, and therefore he had a chance. Otto! Run! To Varus's relief, his brother took one look at the monster and sprang up like a startled mud rat, sprinting for the east door and scattering plastic guardsmen across the floor. For a moment, the Tyranid didn't react, and then, still looking at Varus, it flexed its right claw. Varus noticed the fresh blood upon it, quashing any hope of aid from the household guard, and he immediately regretted his outburst. He felt a dull nausea.
Hey, yo, I don't eat flesh. Like a beast. Come on. Calm down. Ignore the fact that jerky is flesh. Nom 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 nom, thank you for the flesh. Shut up!
Into him as he watched the predator turn away contemptuously, coiling its muscles. With silent, feline grace that belied its size, it leapt clear across the room, vaulting the table and landing in front of Otto with a deafening crash that shattered the parquet floor. It slammed its scything talons into the ground on either side of his younger brother, who toppled back in open-mouthed horror. Varus watched from the other side of the room, utterly powerless as the courage reserved for his own self-sacrifice drained away. He expected the creature to carve Otto apart at any moment, and then he would run. Yet once again the organism paused, as if savoring death's approach. The clock had stopped chiming, and had returned to its regular beat. It seemed like an affront that it should count away each second in the same way it always did. Slowly, almost tenderly, the Tyranid reached out a talon
thank
and
you for the
enveloped
flesh.
Otto's
Stop it,
face.
Lucy.
He could see his brother shaking uncontrollably. Then it turned its head and looked straight at Varus, piercing him with his gaze once again. Its other claw snaked around Otto's back before raising him to its chest, as a mother would cradle a newborn. He could hear his brother's muffled, gasping sobs as its tendrils probed fiercely toward his mouth. Varus found himself running through the...
Hey, yo, what kind of horror is this? Is it about to French kiss him?
south door. He'd always been good at running. His father said he had sprinter's legs. He burst into the atrium and was halfway toward the main door before he remembered what was happening. He snapped a glance over his shoulder, expecting to see the beast ready to impale him, but it had not pursued. Then he remembered his brother. That might explain why he was running, to get help. There was no other reason. Comforted by this purpose, he ran on, but paused when his outstretched hand reached for the exit. He realized then that he was fleeing out of cowardice. There was no one to fetch, no one who could help in time. And if he left, he'd be leaving his ancestral home, abandoning his only brother to a fate worse than death. He'd abandoned his brother. Behind him, he heard the south door swinging on its hinges and turned. But again, there was nothing there. It was just settling after he had barreled through it. Then the main door opened violently, and he toppled over backward. The figure who walked through was recognizably his father, although he saw him as he never had before. Though he wore the same PDF uniform in which he had spoken to Varus that morning, he seemed larger. There was a hard focus in his eyes and an unyielding tension in his posture. He realized then that his father was prepared to die to protect his kin, and Varus's terror was compounded by shame at having fled. Armed men followed the general, flooding into the hall like water into a crevasse, covering every corner and shadow with the sights of their lasguns. His father turned to
What's with the descriptions like it spread its legs? What the hell?
him. "You're in shock. Tell me where it is." Varus pointed toward the south door leading to the dining room. "Go outside and wait with my men. Wait outside." The tone of command brokered no response. His father turned away, and with a signal his men formed up around him. Verus recognized one of them, Major Hawthorne, a distant relation who'd often joined them for dinner in the very room they were about to storm. At that moment, a sonorous bellow rumbled through the empty manor. It seemed to come from all around them, above and below. It boomed down the stairs and echoed off the paneled walls for a long moment, filling Verus with dread. In a quiet, steady voice, Hawthorne answered, "He is our shield." In unison, the soldiers completed the catechism. "And our protector!" His father remained silent. Despite himself, Verus's spirit soared as the squad surged forward as one. He watched, transfixed as they reached the south door, the lead man bringing it down with a savage kick. Verus followed cautiously, forgetting his father's order and daring to hope that he would see them slay the monster and save his brother. He didn't hear any lasfire from the room beyond, which must mean the creature had temporarily eluded them. Yet they were the best his world had to offer. It was only a matter of time. They'd probably saved Otto already. Verus felt a sudden disturbance in the air behind him, and with a sharp intake of breath, panic finally overcame him. He felt a claw encase his head, a talon resting gently on the base of his skull as he was lifted bodily into the air.
Give me 1 second. I need to get on my mom.
Lil bokadragon scared bokath 1 cree 2 bokath 1 cree 2 bokath 1 cree 2.
My mom was like, "I'll send it back to you." She was frustrated. I'm like, what?
The monster shrieked and chaos ensued. The creature burst into the dining room, brandishing Verus before it like a ghastly trophy. Through the blood pooling in his eyes, he caught glimpses of soldiers frantically taking up formation to confront the new threat from behind. He heard men shouting, begging for orders, and imagined nervous fingers itching upon triggers. For a moment, he could just make out what he thought was the silhouette of his father, who alone stood motionless and silent. And somehow, through it all, he could just make out the unfaltering heartbeat rhythm of the grandfather clock. Or perhaps he was imagining it. The Tyranid screamed its challenge and leapt toward the firing line. Verus heard his father give the order, "Open fire!" The fusillade of las bolts pierced them both, and the monster died without sound. Only Verus screamed.
Well, rip son.
Months later, Major Hawthorne gazed down at the corpse of his commanding officer. The morgue was cold, lending him an unusual clarity. Every few minutes, a quake from above dislodged a cloud of particles from the rockcrete ceiling, which drifted lazily in the air. Compared to the carnage of the battlefield, the harsh lights and equally
Oh, thank you.
spaced tables created a sense of order and peace. Although the bodies
I just put it back. Okay.
were the same. The general had died leading a doomed charge to retake a forward trench in the southeast quadrant. Although Hawthorne knew, as had been plain to see, that he had been dead for months, defeated before he ever set foot on the battlefield, he dragged his men down with him. Hawthorne didn't have any children. He couldn't comprehend what it was like to lose 2 sons in a matter of minutes. But apparently the Tyranid did. They had supposed that the lictor was hunting the general. But what if the foul creature had intended to untether his sanity by rendering him not only powerless to protect his children, but culpable in their deaths? And that had implications that troubled him. That was more.
Wait, so they're smart enough that they will sacrifice some of their own to make the chain of command lose their mind in insanity. That's kind of creepy scary.
Than anticipating the behavioral patterns of prey. That was manipulating their psychology for a desired effect, which suggested a much deeper, more intimate understanding. Hawthorne had fought chaos cultists, those who cast aside the Emperor's grace and embraced the abyss, the decadence, the scheming, the rage. Yet even those warped, twisted vermin embodied a recognizable, though corrupted humanity. He'd fought greenskins too, thankfully from a safe distance. It was obvious they barely understood fundamental human drives and, more importantly, simply didn't care. The Tyranid were different. To have mastered human psychology so completely, And yet,
That's like... I don't think you understand the implications of this. The decision-making would be instant.
to deliberately Hawthorne wheeled the body of his friend into the crematorium. He paused over the activation study. They were all going to die. Augustation Vox Primary Ancum had admitted as much before the station's processors were unable to comprehend the sheer size of Hive Fleet cicatrix as it arrived in system. Tech Adept Grohl seemed to have gone into some sort of standby, cortical plug still linking him to the Deep Space Station's drives. He sat bound in his binary communion chair, eyes glazed, pale lips quivering. Crassus had given up trying to bring him back online. Estimated time to contact? The Sensorium Master asked, voice hoarse. He was watching the external pict screens. Unknown. Another of the Void Station's six-man crew, Serene, responded. My systems are all glitched, but running off the last speed and trajectory readings we managed to file, I estimate no more than 10 minutes. Nobody replied. Everyone's eyes were on the pict feed. The external...
This one seems to be in another area, obviously. I'm thinking from the picture I'm assuming this is a different type of Tyranid though.
External recordings had managed to pick out their doom.
Which like confuses me. Are there different strains of Tyranid, or like, and they're all under the same hive mind, or is it just all one hive mind? Somehow they have different like evolution strains everywhere.
Of real space in the station's immediate vicinity was a grainy, static washed green. But the resolution was enough to make out the thing approaching them through the void. The Augur's systems had been constructed to collate and analyze non-visual data. Such clinical information was of far more use than the scant things that could be detected through the naked eye, watching view screen images of distant objects. In a twist of cruel irony, JUF-D19 Rimwood's grainy old pic recorders were the only pieces of data collection equipment not overloaded by the sheer size of the Xenos fleet. Now that fleet's vanguard was visible. Something was nearing the station, drawing towards it with a silent, eerie inevitability. Its form defied easy definition. Davrik, born to a middle-ranking Ashhiver family on Colaris Prime, had never seen the ocean before, but he'd witnessed the strange, frilled creatures imported as foodstuffs for Colaris' teeming hab blocks from harvest worlds like Aquim and New Haven. The thing approaching JUF-D19 Rimwood looked like one such creature, albeit far larger, and cast out into the void. Its back was a gnarled, curling hump of scarred bone plating, while its underside was a mass of dozens of limb-like tendrils that waved back and forth with a lazy synchronization, as though powering...
Why do they all have tendrils? Explain this to me. Why all tentacles?
...it forward through the depths. Streamers of void-frozen fluid clung to its fronds, while its head constituted nothing more than a fleshy maw. Orifices in its spine shell occasionally gouted bursts of bioeffluvium that crystallized in the void. Vanguard organism, Analyst Corday said, as though to break the awful silence that had fallen over the station. No specific class or designation. Estimated time to contact less than 5 minutes, Serene added quietly. We're about to be boarded, or God Emperor knows what else. Crassus snapped, trying to wake up his stunned crew. I want everything wiped. Now. Follow your damn protocols. The icy, expectant stillness that had settled over the station dissipated as they all hurried to comply. Davrik began to wipe his core cogitators and processor units, inserting a series of codes that were authorized by Crassus's gene stamp. The hurried activity helped draw his mind away from the cold sweat slicking his body, the throbbing in his skull, and the bass, panic-stoked fear churning in his stomach. "Systems are beginning to go offline," he confirmed. "Critical's multiplying, Chief." Crassus didn't respond. He was too busy giving authorization to Ancom to scramble the Vox systems. Serene was wiping data slates, while Corday was dumping sheaves of paperback copies and data readout chits into the vacuum chute. Only Grohl was motionless, still staring into nothing. "Tech Adept, respond," Crassus said, turning his attention to the Adeptus Mechanicus acolyte. The coghead remained unmoving. "Maximum priority response override," Crassus snapped. "Look at me, Grohl." The adept blinked once, slowly. "He's gone, Chief," Corday said, glancing over from the chute. "You've got to unplug him from the data frame." For a moment, Crassus looked as though he was going to reply. Then, instead, he reached down to the base of the Adept's MEM unit, sutured into the pale flesh at the base of his skull. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled. There was an instant of resistance. Then the unit disengaged with a click. Grohl didn't react, though a line of saliva escaped his sagging lips. Crassus reached up to the heavy cortical plug inserted into Grohl's cranium, near the surgery-scarred crown of his white scalp. "God, Emperor, forgive me," the Sensorum Master muttered, before yanking the plug free. Systems across the station's remaining displays began to chime and flash, as though the machine spirits were calling out in shock. Grohl spasmed violently for a moment, held in check by his binary chair's restraints, then slumped back. A single hand continued to twitch and clench. "Eyes on your stations," Crassus ordered, though the surety in his voice was gone. "Contact," Serene said. The void monster filled the picked screen. Up close, its form was even more nightmarish. Davrik could see the spine growths that lined its motion frills, and the scarring on its curled shell where debris had lashed it during its long voyage between the stars. As the station crew watched, its maw distended, pulling apart. Contrary to Davrik's horrified imaginings, it did not possess row after row of snapping lock teeth. Instead, its mouth was a fleshy morass of feelers, disgusting tendrils trailing icy slime. They extended as it came blindly upon the station, reaching out past the pick screen's pan. A proximity alarm bell started to clatter, and Davrik felt the decking beneath him shudder. It's going to eat us," Ancom stammered, looking as though he was about to be sick. "Oh, Throne, it's..." "Silence," Crassus snapped, though he too was visibly shaking. More tendrils reached ponderously out, questing around the station's flanks. Secondary alarms activated, and the adamantium around the crew shuddered and groaned. Was it going to crush them, tear them open and expose them to the void, suck them into the vile, drooling orifice now practically pressed up against the pick display? Davrik found himself staring at the terrified image, unable to shift away from his workbench, unable to look at anything other than the unnatural, pulsating flesh that now filled the screen.
I see why this is horror. I don't like it. Go away.
And then it shifted. The screen blurred, lost for a moment to static. For a second, Davrik assumed one of the monster's tendrils had knocked out the external picked feed. But when the view screen came back online, the image was still present. What was more, the maw was receding. The Xenos beast was reversing away from them. The station shuddered again as the tendrils that had latched around it released their snaggle-toothed grip, sliding back into the monster's depths as its maw constricted. It pulled away from them, and then went upwards, displaying its fleshy lower fronds as it slipped over the auger masts and Vox beacons. The picked feed on the other side of the station caught its trailing rear as it passed back down the other side. floating on in-system past the little monitoring platform. For a moment, nobody spoke. Davrik, like the others, simply stared after the Xenos creature's languid, receding form. It was Crassus who snapped them out of it. "Turn off those damned alarms," he ordered. Corday hit the overrides, one after the other. Silence flooded the space left by the clattering emergency systems. Even the hum of the cogitators and Vox banks, now deactivated, had gone. Davrik had never heard the little station so silent before. What do we do now?
Let me go back a little bit there.
Unable to look at anything other than the unnatural pulsating flesh that now filled the screen.
Irish noises!
And then it shifted. The screen blurred, lost for a moment to static. For a second, Davrik assumed one of the monster's tendrils had knocked out the external pict feed. But when the view screen came back online, the image was still present. What was more, the Maw was receding. The Xenos beast was reversing away from them. The station shuddered again as the tendrils that had latched around it released their snaggle-toothed grip, sliding back into the monster's depths as its maw constricted. It pulled away from them, and then went upwards, displaying its fleshy lower fronds as it slipped over the auger masts and Vox beacons. The pict feed on the other side of the station caught its trailing rear as it passed back down the other side, floating on in-system past the little monitoring platform.
That's a big, scary monster.
For a moment, nobody spoke. Davrik, like the others, simply stared after the Xenos creature's languid, receding form. It was Crassus who snapped them out of it. "Turn off those damned alarms," he ordered. Corday hit the overrides, one after the other. Silence flooded the space left by the clattering emergency systems. Even the hum of the cogitators and Vox banks, now deactivated, had gone. Davrik had never heard the little station so silent before. What do we do now? Serene breathed. All eyes turned to Crassus. With what was clearly an immense effort, the old Sensorum master stilled his shaking hands. The ugly...
Why did it leave? I'm trying to figure this out. Like, why does that make sense? Like, maybe it, like... But no, the Tyranids have shown that they're very smart. So, I'm confused. Why would it leave? And it didn't even take out the cameras, so like you can't say, oh, it was just there to take out the camera.
I made a friend. She is called Boka. Or, what are you doing, Boka? Wait. No. Put that down, Boka. Put that down. Ugh. Ask.
Shut up. We're trying to horror react over here. But I'm still confused. Why would it leave?
Emergency lighting made him look even more wizened and gaunt than usual. "We wait," he said. "There's nothing else we can do. The distress beacon is still transmitting. One of the system defense cutters will pick us up." It was a lie, and they all knew it.
How do they think it's a lie? It left. Like, is it gonna come back? I guess, obviously, this is a horror and it's not even halfway done. Hey, yo, chat, shut up. I am a terrifying monster. Although I don't have tentacles, so I don't know.
Vast Xenos threat had just arrived in system. The last considerations for the captains of Darkan's handful of combat-worthy voidcraft would be the salvation of the auger stations on the system's fringes. Nor were there any shuttles or salvation pods to facilitate an evacuation. The crew were delivered to the station and then, after 6 months, rotated off for a week's leave. According to the cycle logs, there was a full Terran month to go before they were to be...
No. You didn't see the first part of this.
As terrifying as a teddy bear.
Shut up. The first part of this showed that they're smart enough to just literally sacrifice like 2 little pawns to make the entire like area's generals just go insane. Like they literally sacrificed 2 to get the general to be the reason both of his sons died. Like you literally win the war at that point because the general's just mad with grief, not thinking straight, does the wrong things.
Replaced.
I
There
didn't
was no
see
way for
anything.
any of
It's
them to abandon
audiobook.
the station.
Silly Boka.
I'm gonna fight you. You know what I mean.
Why did it leave us? Corday wondered out loud.
That's what I'm asking, dude. Why did it leave?
Staring after the receding alien bioship.
I guess because there's just 2 of you and it realizes there's no point in killing you.
It had us. We were no threat to it, Crassus said slowly. No threat to its fleet.
That's what I'm thinking. That they're literally so insignificant and they gain nothing out of killing them that it's just gonna leave them. Like they're the safest place in the world right there. With how little there are of them and how little, like, they threaten. Like, they don't even threaten. Like, 0% threat rate. This would be like... I'm trying to think of in terms of Fire Emblem, this would be the character... You've already maxed out EXP. There's no reason to kill you. You can't even hurt me. Why would I bother? I'll just go and kill this guy. That gives me at least 20 of EXP.
Chief, Serene interrupted. Chief, look.
The difference being, like, this guy can't even move, so you don't care about him. You just run past him.
The Augur analyst was pointing back at the picked screens. It took a second for Davrik to realize what he was looking at. When he did, the reason for their survival became clear. The Vanguard Xenos bioships had passed by. JUF-D19 Rimwood was now at the heart of their fleet. And, compared to the organic drones that quested ahead of the main swarm, the true organisms of the Hive Fleet were behemoths. Davrik's mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing, as he took in sheets of pock-marked chitin the size of small continents, and toothed orifices the size of cities. The thick clusters of tendrils along its flank and underbelly writhed.
What is with the tentacles? Does everything have to have tentacles?
In the solar winds, while its maw was encompassed by 2 great, wicked, beak-like bone plates that looked as though they could have sheared an Imperial capital ship in half. And the worst thing about the nightmarish Leviathan was that it was coming straight towards the Augur station. "Oh, God, Emperor," Ankum stammered, over and over. Corday was quietly sobbing, his head in his hands. Serene just stared, the image on the view screen reflected in her wide, dark eyes. Only Crassus turned away from the display. He walked over to the worn leather of his command chair, paused, tugged his dark blue Sensora Master's uniform straight, and sat down. His expression was unreadable, jaw locked, though in the harsh emergency lumens, he looked more haggard than ever. "Crew members," he said, his words cutting through Ankum's and Corday's despair. "In the past decades of service, it shames me to admit that I have not said this enough. Regardless, if there was ever a time, Throne knows it's now. It has been an honor to man this station with all of you." "And with you, Chief," Davrik said. He was the only one to respond. His own words felt distant, disconnected, as though he was speaking to himself from somewhere far away. His mind was sluggish, unresponsive. His breathing felt labored. A strange, detached part of his mind supposed that he was probably having a panic attack. Crassus had no more orders to give. He simply sat, watching the view screen. Davrik reached out towards his little picked capture of Emilia and Drui, his wife and son, tacked to the side of his monitor. He would see them again, someday. He was sure of it. A fresh surge of stuttered oaths from Ankum distracted him before he could pull the pict off the side of the display. The Tyranid bioship had filled the view screens. Even as the stunned crew watched, the monstrosity's great, hooked chitin beak split apart. The maw yawned wide. Impossibly wide. Wide enough, Davrik was sure, to swallow one of Darkan's moons. Its shadow fell across the auger station, blotting out the light of the stars. The structure around them seemed to shudder, as though its terror matched that of its crew. The view screen now showed nothing but static washed darkness. It had swallowed them whole.
Well, that explains why I left them.
Corday had slumped on the deck, shaking and weeping uncontrollably.
Something big enough to just eat the whole thing and not even have to stop moving.
Crassus was looking down into his lap, knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. Ankum had finally stopped gibbering. "Serene," he managed to say, looking over at the auger analyst. "Serene, there's something I need to tell you." She continued to stare at the now blank view screen. A sudden impact threw them all. Davrik found himself sprawling across the deck, almost on top of Corday. The station shook violently, tremors dislodging rune banks and audio systems, and sending Davrik's empty recaf tin bouncing across the deck.
Although it still, pains me to be confused. Why even bother eating it? There's three humans in it. Why bother?
The alarms triggered again across the cramped station. Crassus, who alone had managed to stay in his seat, deactivated them without comment. The view screen had gone offline completely, showing nothing but grey static. They're going to board us, Ankum stammered as they picked themselves up.
You're eaten! Why do you think they're gonna board you?
Any response was lost in another jarring impact. The station's frame shrieked in protest at the stresses put upon it. With their systems scrambled and broken, it was impossible to tell exactly where they were, or what was happening outside. The station seemed to settle slightly, the sounds of tortured metal reduced to a low creak. They all scanned the ceiling, looking for any sign of a breach. "Do you hear that?" Serene said. It was the first time she'd spoken since seeing the bioship. They all listened, breath held, straining to hear over the groan of adamantium and Corday's muted sobs. Eventually, Davrik caught what Serene had detected, a faint scratching, scrabbling noise, as though someone or something was scraping across the outside of the hull. It mirrored the scratching, tormenting all of them from inside their own skulls. "They're on the hull," Davrik said. Before he could go on, a crash shattered the breathless quiet. The section directly above Crassus's chair, in the center of the station's cockpit, collapsed. With it came a flood of broiling green liquid that struck Crassus just as he looked up. If the old Sensorum master managed to draw breath to scream, the bioacid flooded his mouth, throat, and lungs before he could make a sound. Davrik caught an impression of his death as he was lost entirely in the torrent. Flesh sloughing from bones, organics consumed in a heartbeat. The rest of the crew recoiled, but too slowly. Serene, nearest to the center of the cockpit, was struck by the acidic spray. Her hands went up to her exposed face, and her screaming filled the claustrophobic space. "No!" Ankum wailed, lunging across his bench to catch the auger analyst as she collapsed. He managed to drag her hands away from her face, then recoiled. Her features had already been reduced to pockmarked bone, her eyeballs running like liquid from their sockets, meat and tendon slipping away with her fingers. Still, she screamed. Ankum doubled over and was sick. Davrik, whose station was furthest from Crassus's chair, scrambled back on top of his bench, as the flood of acid spread across the decking plates. Serene had collapsed into the rising swill, her body coming apart. Ancom tried to push himself against his vox banks, but was sick again and collapsed. The bugs got to him before the acid. There were insects in the hissing, steaming slime, writhing, sightless maggot things with hard black shells. They swarmed from the discolored...
Okay, so this is just insect horror, and I don't like it. I don't like it. New rule. No insect horror.
Vomit-like biomatter. The air full of the susurration of their passing as they swiftly covered the deck.
Don't like
and then
it.
the cogitator stations,
Don't like
workbenches,
it.
and walls, riding the rising tide of acid. First hundreds, and then thousands of them reached Ancom, swarming over his boots and knees and up his arms where he was crouched against the Vox systems. He tried to scream, but choked on his own bile. His eyes rolled back into their sockets as the alien swarm began eating him alive. Corday killed himself. Face still streaked with tears, he leapt directly from his bench into the stream that had consumed Crassus and his command chair. He was gone in an instant, as the breach in the station hull was burned wider. As Ancom's eaten-out remains collapsed into the bioorganics sloshing about the cockpit's deck, Davrik stood rooted to the top of his bench. He couldn't think, couldn't move. He was in the throes of panic. A part of him realized he should end it quickly like Corday. But another part was desperate for another way out. Any way out that avoided the nightmare bile that was burning away everything. It was digesting them whole. Even as the terror kept him in place, Grohl's binary chair collapsed, pitching the unresponsive tech adept into the effluvium. His red cloak billowed for a moment before he was lost, coming apart amidst the steaming clouds of liquefied organics. For a moment, Davrik was alone. For a single ludicrous second, everything felt surreal, ridiculous, almost calm. It had to be a nightmare.
No, no. No more insect horror. That's the rule.
None of
It's a rule now.
this horror could possibly be real. Then
I don't
his bench
like it.
collapsed.
God, Emperor, no!
He screamed, trying to scramble back onto the plastile's disintegrating remains.
No! No!
The bioacid caught him, sloshing around his boots and his lower fatigues. His panicked wails quickly turned to screams of agony as the material was eaten away, exposing flesh that in turn began to slough off. Muscle and sinew became grey organic paste that revealed bone that gave way and splintered beneath its own acid-gnawed weight. Davrik died slowly, on his knees, eaten up inch by the bile and the sightless burrowing.
Let's not be that descriptive, okay? Yeah, okay. There's your hour, guys. Oh my god. reacts for insect out of 10. Can you, like, jump off a bridge or something? Not really, because I know some of you might actually do that, but, like, can you? Alright, let's pull this. I'm gonna let you guys have a chance to give me an idea of what you want, and then I'm gonna pick something. Summon the one ghost? Okay.
Didn't you play enough of Warframe yesterday to fill for 2 days?
True.